Alright, so, Tarantino has said on multiple occasions that his favorite movie is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Correct.
And you can see, like, when you really look into the mechanics of his movies, he takes a lot of inspiration from westerns, and always has, despite the fact that they weren't even close to that.
Yeah, of course.
So, it only made sense that he finally did a western.
A real western.
Despite what Kurt Russell says. We'll get into that in a minute. But,
I figured you want to talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, this, it's very interesting the way this movie ended up being the masterpiece that it is, because it had so many production problems. I think they went like way over schedule and really blew up their budget, and people kept coming and going out of the cast list. I always the release date was always set at Christmas, and I was afraid to get on the internet every single day because I was afraid to see that it was going to be pushed back.
My movie was set on Christmas too, and it got pushed back the next year.
We could have had a Leo Gets Shot at the end double feature.
Yes.
Yeah, Django is fairly new. It's less than a year old, but I'd like to think people realize how spoilery these are going to be. And I'd like to think pretty much everybody that was going to see Django probably has by now.
Yes.
That cares enough, anyway, about whether or not it's... I give away many details.
Well, anyone that's watched any of these Summer of Tarantino segments should know that you're going to be very spoilerific on them.
This one's new enough to where you might at least want to put that in the description or something, just to be safe. So regardless, I guess we'll just...
Jump right into it.
I'm actually relieved that this segment is ending now, because for some reason, these segments make me nervous.
Really?
Well, because he's my favorite director, obviously, living or dead.
Yeah.
And I've never been that great at talking about the movies that I love and describing why I love them, so it's nerve-wracking to have to explain why I think he's the greatest director of all time.
I apologize for putting you in this predicament over the past several months.
I always say that I don't understand why people are so hateful towards movies. Really, when you boil it down to it, it's so much easier to talk about the movies that you hate.
Case in point, the movie reviews that are available right now.
Yeah, the movies that I love usually get about 10 minutes, and the movies that I hate get about half an hour.
Unless it's like The Iceman or Spring Breakers. Or...
Well, anyway, we'll just jump right into the opening scene. Obviously, the title is an homage to the Franco Nero movies.
Mm-hmm.
He was only in two. There was Django in 1966, and then its sequel that was like 20 years later, where he's like a monk or something. And then there was a movie he did called Massacre Time. It's pretty entertaining, and but because of the success of after Django, the popular thing was to make all these really cheap westerns and put the name Django in them.
Yeah, of course.
So they would get attention. Well, since Massacre Time was a western that starred Franco Nero, they retitled it on a lot of like video and DVD cases. I forget which one they used, but they turned it into a Django movie, basically, even though his name's not even Django in it. The name Django in it is actually rarely in the movies normally.
Fair enough.
And of course, the opening scene is after the classic Columbia logo, which was an interesting choice to go with.
Oh yeah.
The theme song to the original Django, which, much like this, was the opening title sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same song. And they play the whole song from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those, I don't know what it is about it, but it's one of my favorite, it's probably my favorite opening credit sequence of his movies.
The whip sound and the Django logo comes up.
For some reason, Don Johnson gets the whip sound.
Yeah, that was awesome. Don Johnson's Big Daddy.
And then we just literally go right into it with James Remar and I want to say Russo is that guy's name, the other guy. The guy's just prepared to get winged.
Hold on.
But anyway, we see Waltz come out of the darkness, and immediately you can tell where this movie's coming from, because it's Waltz doing his using his fancy terms where James Remar actually keeps telling him to speak English. Just
Yeah.
because he uses big words. And in a very interesting piece of foreshadowing, Waltz kills both of them, obviously.
That's Chance Fancy Pants.
Yeah, no, he kills Remar and he shoots the other guy's horse.
Yeah.
And makes him fall over. Him shooting James Remar is an interesting piece of foreshadowing that comes in later, obviously. Are you about to say something?
No.
Did you find out who he was?
No.
His name will come to me eventually.
He's one of the Speck brothers, right?
Yeah, he is Dickie.
Okay, that would be Dickie Speck. Continue to talk.
It's kind of... I don't know why this happened, but I always found it kind of... I don't know if there's anything behind it or not, but the fact that Dickie's horse that he shot is named Roscoe.
Yeah.
For some reason, that's also the name of the bartender in Greenville.
You shot Roscoe!
But anyway,
an ace!
and then that's when we, this movie doesn't hesitate to be a revenge movie.
Nope.
It pretty much tells you it's going to be a revenge movie from beginning to end. When we get the scene where, for some reason, Rodney keeps coming back. The guy that's, at the end, that's in the cage with him, with the Wendicke people, is, I'm pretty sure he's in the line here, too, in the very first scene. And somehow he managed to escape and then get caught again in the middle of the movie somewhere, off screen.
James Russo. You're right.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You're good.
And we get the first taste of it being a revenge movie by Waltz basically giving the slaves the keys to their shackles and leaving them with Dickie. And before the scene even ends, they've already killed him. What was it? I gave you my last apple.
Gave you my last apple. Yeah, I love that line.
And that also gives you a first taste of exactly the Tarantino-like violence where they shoot Dickie in the head with a shotgun and pretty much his entire body explodes.
Blood just shoots everywhere.
Because that's the interesting thing. Before we continue on, I'll go ahead and mention the what he intentionally did with the violence, where he wanted to make sure... This goes in with the revenge movie thing. You'll notice that there's two kinds of violence in the movie. There's the violence towards white people and the violence towards the slaves.
Yes.
When there's violence towards the slaves, it's really realistic and brutal and uncomfortable. But when a white person is being... Violence towards a white person, it's usually in a very over-the-top fashion.
Very grandiose.
Like one shot and it just literally explodes out of them. Like somebody pointed out, Quentin Tarantino characters do not have bones in their body. They are 10% skin, 90% blood.
That's brilliant. Whoever came up with that.
Somebody tried to address that when he was answering questions after he won his Oscar, and he didn't quite... The guy didn't really speak English, so Tarantino had trouble understanding the question, but I think that's what the guy was talking about.
Nice.
Because he didn't know how to take the question. It was something like, yes, my characters do have bones in their bodies.
Nice.
And then we go through the interesting scene where they, I don't know if Schultz is just that good of a person or what, but the fact that he's baffled by the fact that the townspeople are disgusted by the fact that Django's on a horse. And that's where we get our Russ Tamblyn cameo.
Yes.
Who was in that old movie, Son of a Gunfighter. So, of course, he's in the movie as the character Son of a Gunfighter, and Amber Tamblyn, who's his daughter in real life, who's that just random girl in the window.
Mm-hmm.
Her character name is Daughter of a Son of a Gunfighter.
That's great.
It's a really nice story, too. I looked into it because I wondered why in God's name Amber Tamblyn was in this movie just to be a girl that looks out the window silently. And she said it was with Russ Tamblyn being known for all those old westerns. Mm-hmm. She just wanted to see at the end when the credits are happening, and you see it's like the western font and Russ and Amber Tamblyn's names are together on a movie screen. That's what she wanted.
That's awesome.
So then we go into the. You gotta love the way he just pulls the most obscure people out of complete randomness.
Yes.
And we get the brilliant Tom Wopat cameo.
Marshall Gil Tatum.
And he's that's where I get one of my favorite shots of the movie. It was actually released as a publicity still, only in a different angle. There was this publicity still that people assumed was, like, if you go to IMDb, it labels the picture as being Jamie Foxx. But it's the dirt ground, and it's the shadow, and then it's the blood on the ground.
Nice.
Well, it's actually, if you watch the movie, it's actually Tatum's shadow, and it's the blood of the sheriff. And the actual full shot is, it's the tavern doors, and then the blood's down here, and then we see the shadow, like, off to the side. I don't know why that shot made an impression on me, it just did.
I gotcha.
And the interesting thing is, we have yet to establish exactly what is Schultz's deal.
Yeah.
Because at this point in the movie, we think he's a psychopath.
Pretty much.
And Django also thinks he's a psychopath because he doesn't know him and has no idea what he's doing. Because he doesn't let Django in on anything. He just kind of leaves it for him to figure out later as it progresses. But of course, that's when we learn that it's his job to kill people.
Yeah.
And he tells Tatum, "You owe me $200." And then of course they play the song "His Name Is King."
Yeah.
As he rides through.
So awesome. Soundtrack's amazing in this movie.
And we have probably one of my favorite cameos of all time. I know the movie's less than a year old, but I don't care.
I agree.
We are learning Django's backstory. And we learn that he was held by a guy named Old Man Karukin. And Old Man Karukin is Bruce Dern, and he is in the movie for about 30 seconds. And I think never before have I seen somebody make such an impression in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The first movie I saw him in was The Burbs. Like, I saw, like, Coming Home and Support Your Local Sheriff and others, The Cowboys.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he's the slave owner because he was always the villain in Westerns. The interesting thing about him is in The Cowboys, he holds the distinction of being one of, like, 2 people that has killed John Wayne in a movie. Wow. So it's very interesting that he is the ruthless slave owner that owned Django to begin with.
Yeah.
We're on YouTube, so I can't quote any of his dialogue, but it's very chilling. Yes. And it annoyed some people, the oversaturatedness of the flashback scenes. But I just think it's a cool technique also, and it also helps, like we were talking about Blue Jasmine, for instance.
Yeah.
You can tell easily what's a flashback and what isn't, and it gives you that feel. I don't know what people have against it. It's
beyond me.
Whatever. Well, anyway, and then of course that's where we end up at a clothing store, where I gotta try to remember all this. This is a very, very complicated in-joke or reference. It involves Django's blue suit.
Yes.
I can't remember the full story. It involves something like, oh my god, I can't even remember. Django's blue suit basically comes back to, somebody who had a method that was like called the Unchained method or something. Something of that sort. I don't remember the whole story. It's kind of it's a complicated circle to come back to.
Got it.
But, obviously once Schultz basically makes it a game for him. Like he says, you're a character and you pick out a costume and all that. And that's when we end up at Big Daddy's house. The big house. Everything is big around him. And Big Daddy is Don Johnson, dressed like Colonel Sanders, talking like Foghorn Leghorn, and it's great.
Yeah, it is.
He actually said in an interview he based his voice off Foghorn Leghorn cartoons.
It's totally there. You definitely can spot it right away.
Your favorite off-screen character of all time, Jerry.
Jerry! Yes!
We're supposed to assume that they're trying to figure out... he doesn't want Django treated like a white person, but Schultz says to make sure to not treat him like a slave. So Big Daddy says to treat him like Jerry. And the way... I think we're supposed to use context clues.
Of course.
Apparently, Jerry could possibly be a mentally handicapped person.
That's what I'm thinking. I've always been under that impression, but I wasn't positive. I guess it's left up to your imagination. Tarantino's probably not going to say anything. Why would he?
So, then that takes us into another flashback where we, obviously the plot stems from, and the trailer kind of fooled people.
Mm-hmm.
The trailer made people believe that Django helping Schultz find the Brittle Brothers was going to be the whole movie, basically.
Yep.
But it's in this whole first segment. Like, the Brittle Brothers are, like, they're just there to start the plot, really. Yep. And, of course, they're led by Big John Brittle, who is the infamous MC Katie. We weren't even going straight to Sideways.
Thank you.
I was just talking about in general.
That's infamous for me.
Everybody's seen his face in
yes.
one way or another. Whether it be that episode of Fresh Prince, where he's the ex-con that works for them, or the Broken Lizard movies, even.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have a flashback and we see, it's a scene that a lot of people love, and it really speaks, everybody was telling a story. I watched so much press stuff for Django leading up to it, because I couldn't get enough of it before it came out.
Yes.
And everybody was telling the story about when they were filming the scene where Kerry Washington is being tortured. Everyone on the set was crying while watching her. And then, of course, that leads us right into, you know something bad is going to happen, because Django spots Ellis in the field. And she says, Bettina says, "Is that who you were looking for?" And he just says, "Yep." And he just takes off. And he, nonchalantly says, "Go get that white man I came here with."
Yep.
Which a lot of people say, there's a lot of debate on whether King Schultz is a leading or supporting character. That's why his Oscar win was controversial. A lot of people say that line is what solidifies whether he was leading or supporting. Mm-hmm. When Django says, "Go get that white man I came here with."
That says that Jamie Foxx is the lead and Schultz is the supporting.
And then we go and we see that they're whipping Jody for breaking eggs, I think it was. And to completely throw the audience for a loop, he jumps the gun, literally, and kills the Brittle Brothers right there, 40 minutes in. Mm-hmm. There's over 2 hours left of this movie, and he's killed the Brittle Brothers. So, and there's obviously the great scene where Ellis is taken off through the field, and there's the great exchange between, he asks him if that's Ellis, and he says, yeah, and he says, "Are you sure?" "Yeah." "Are you positive?" "I don't know what positive means." "It means you're sure." "Yes, I'm positive that's him." And then he just shoots him like that.
And then, of course, his delivery at the end of that.
Hold on, I got it.
Do it.
I haven't watched it for a while. I gotta remember. I'm positive he did.
I'm positive he did.
And of course, you have the slow-mo shot of the blood hitting the cotton, which everybody said, like, just speaks so many years worth of volume.
And visually speaking, it's an amazing looking shot too.
And then this will become important later when I'm discussing something that a lot of people complain about. Much like he did with the Speck Brothers, and much like he did with Gil Tatum, Schultz manages to talk his way out of being killed by Big Daddy, and then they leave. Like, pack up the Brittle Brothers on the bodies, and let's get out of here. And then, of course, I should probably talk about the fact that they blow up the carriage so early.
Yeah. With
the tooth attached to it. There's actually a reason for that I would have never thought of. There was a story going around that while they were shooting, Christoph Waltz fell off his horse and broke his pelvis.
Yep.
And of course, there's the funny backup story where Waltz says he actually got a gift from Jamie Foxx that was a saddle with a seatbelt attached to it. Well, since his pelvis was broken, he couldn't sit on a horse regularly. Nope. So they had him attach the carriage to it. And that's how he rode around for the first half. And then, I guess since they had already shot scenes of him on a horse, halfway through the movie they use it to blow up the bag heads.
Oh my god, that's such a hilarious scene.
Yes. Apparently we're supposed to assume that Big Daddy was the head of what eventually became the Ku Klux Klan. And then we have the another shot. It mirrors the blood on the cotton, where we have Big Daddy taking off. And then, you know, Big Daddy is getting away, and he's like, no, I got this. And then he shoots Big Daddy from this incredible distance. And it's a great shot because we don't see it happen. We see the horse's legs, and then we see like a little blood mist come down into the frame. And then Big Daddy's body just falls off. And then we pan up, and the horse has the blood streak across it, and it's running off into the night. And then that's when Schultz realizes that Django's a natural at killing people.
Yes.
So, then I believe that's when we get the story of Brumilda.
Mm-hmm.
When, well, he comes to that realization later, but then we learn why Schultz thought it was so important that Schultz just happens to be German, and Brumhilde just happens to be a woman with a German name that needs rescued. It was the exact same name in this this like famous German tale.
A mythical German Valkyrie.
Very.
I'll use Gauntlet video game terms for that one.
And of course, you know, he tells. Here's the weird thing. There was like. I was curious what Waltz's awards clips would be.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only ones that stand out are kind of spoilery to me. Like
Yeah.
the big ones. And the Oscars mainly used the scene in the bar where he talks about what he does. Honestly, I think one of his most memorable scenes is the scene where he tells the story. I
agree with that.
I don't know what it is about that scene. It's just something does it for me. And it's very similar to the. It brings back memories of the scene in Kill Bill 2 when Bill's telling her the story of the 5-point bomb exploding our technique around the campfire.
Yep.
So, then that's when Schultz decides to basically train him to bounty hunt with him. I didn't even bring up Jonah Hill, by the way.
Yeah.
People who are wondering, Jonah Hill basically just said that he was offered a part in a Tarantino movie and he did not care whatsoever how small the part was. As long as he was in a Tarantino movie, he was going to do it.
Exactly.
Which explains that. It should probably be a good time to bring this up because this is about the time in the movie it would have been. There was a full character in this movie that was deleted named Scotty Harmony.
Yep.
And he was going to be played by Sacha Baron Cohen.
Correct.
And it was going to be the transition of Broomhilda from the Brittle Brothers to Scotty to Calvin Candy. This scene consisted of Scott. Well, I don't know why Sacha Baron Cohen was cast because in the script he's described as a fat kid. But I guess Sacha Baron Cohen probably would have played him like a buffoon or something.
Yeah, of course.
And his family basically buys Broomhilda for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically treats her like a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And then one day he's in the Cleopatra Club in Greenville. And Calvin Candy is also there and spots Broomhilda from across the room. This was originally going to be Calvin Candy's introduction scene.
Yep.
And it's I would have loved to have seen it played out. Sacha Baron Cohen couldn't do it because, number one, he had to promote The Dictator, and also because of Les Mis.
Yeah.
But he's sitting here with Broomhilda, and they're, just having a great time. And he's saying how much he loves her and how much he's falling for her. And then Calvin Candy comes over and says that he wants Broomhilda. But, Scotty doesn't want that. So, basically, he says, Broomhilda runs back to the hotel and goes back up to her room. And then Candy comes over and says he's going to duel Scotty for her. So he lays a gun in front of Scotty and pulls out his own. And he tells the piano player to hit 3 notes. And he says to draw when the 3rd note hits. And Scotty is scared out of his mind and doesn't even put up a fight. On the 3rd note, Candy just blows him away.
Yep.
And then walks across the street to the hotel, goes all the way up to the room, goes into the room where Broomhilda is and takes off his belt and starts beating her with it and chases her all the way out into the street and throws her into the mud and says, "Welcome to Candyland."
That was an awesome visual to see, too.
That was originally going to be Calvin Candy's opening scene, but because Sacha Baron Cohen had to go out, probably for time restraints, too.
Yes.
The whole scene was just done away with. It makes me wonder if Sacha Baron Cohen had been in it, what other scenes would have been cut.
That's a good question.
Because Most people say this movie is too long, but we'll get to
No.
that. We'll get to how much I hate the people that don't like the ending when the ending comes.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that because you mentioned that this was cut from the actual movie. Well, you had told me that here, I found this on the internet. I found Calvin Candy's screen time, basically. And you read all this to me, and I was just like John Petersing it up, and in my head, what it would look like. And
for a while, I was wondering if it was real, because I was like, people could just, write anything and post it, but this feels really, really Tarantino. Like, I think it might be real.
Yeah.
It actually was.
And it was.
So I was not aware at the time that the script had leaked, like, months before.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
This was before you started reading scripts, like, regularly, like you do now.
Yeah, this was the first one I discovered.
Yeah. How appropriate.
What happened, I might as well mention this while we're on the subject. What I did was, I had no idea what happened at the end, because I was desperate to see this movie, so I was going to read the script because I'm impatient.
Of course.
But what happened was, since I knew that this, it's a great for later, and I actually love the way it played out because of this.
Okay.
It was just perfect. It was like supposed to happen this way. I knew what happened to Calvin Candy.
Yeah.
At the end, because I read all the pages that he was in.
And that's what you read me, so.
So what I did when I finally found the whole script was I read the whole thing, and then I got to where Calvin Candy gets shot, and then I stopped right there, and I said, I'm very curious to know where it goes from here, because they just killed Calvin Candy, and all of Calvin Candy's guys are still in that room. Where is it going to go from here?
Yep.
Because there's like 30 pages of the script left, and I stopped there and waited to see how the movie did it. And of course, I would have been shocked anyway, because the whole shootout is not in the script, actually. And the very ending is different, but I'll touch on those when we get there. So anyway, yes, so they go to Greenville in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
There's that great moment. No, wait, back up. I missed a scene.
Snow.
The Smitty McCall scene.
Yeah, Smitty
Which
McCall.
is I don't know why I skipped over it, because it's very important.
Extremely
This
important.
is also where the callback is.
Yep.
Everybody wonders where the there's apart from the fact that Paula Schultz and Kill Bill 2 could be related to King Schultz. People wonder where the other character reference is. When you look at the handbill for Smitty McCall, it's there's a whole list of names. The last one is Crazy Craig Coons.
Yeah.
And Crazy Craig Coons is apparently an ancestor of Captain Coons in Pulp Fiction.
Yep.
So there's that. And then, of course, that's when, for some reason, at first, Django has trouble shooting Smitty. Smitty McCall, by the way, is played by the guy in Death Proof, I think. The guy that hung out with Eli Roth. His name is actually McCall. He's one of the writers on 21 Jump Street, I think. I'm pretty positive on that. Yeah, then we get the montage, then we end up in Mississippi.
I love the montage because it gets you ready for the rest of the movie.
Okay, here's the big debate everybody wonders about. People want to know why Dr. Schultz's plan is so elaborate.
Yeah.
When this could have been done much easier.
True.
Well, the thing is a reporter called this a harebrained scheme, and Tarantino took to it. He wasn't offended, and he wasn't pissed off, though the reporter was very nervous that he might have been.
Of course.
Because Tarantino called up the reporter and said, I'd like to talk to you on the record about you saying this is a harebrained scheme. Turns out Tarantino just wanted to explain why that scene is the way it is.
That's cool.
Well, the thing is basically all they had to do was Schultz could have just walked up and said, I want to buy a slave. I'm German. I want a German slave girl. And they say, oh, we have Broomhilda here. There you go.
Yep.
That's all that needed to happen.
15 minutes, all said and done.
But Tarantino said that if you watch the rest of the movie, you'll notice Dr. Schultz is not that kind of person.
True.
Because, going back to the scene with Gil Tatum, Dr. Schultz could have gone to Tatum first and said, "Your sheriff's not who he is. I'm here to kill him."
Yeah.
And explained everything and did what he needed to do and gotten his $200. But that's not the kind of person that Dr. Schultz is.
No.
Dr. Schultz is very theatrical.
Yes.
And loves making a big spectacle out of what he does. Because that's just the kind of person he is. So, the whole scene with Tom Wobbat explains why this scene is so elaborate when it doesn't need to be.
True.
Plus, we wouldn't have the awesome movie that we have. We wouldn't even have to meet Calvin Candy.
That's a good point.
So, he comes up with the big plan. The One-Eyed Charlie plan.
Yep.
So, they go to the Cleopatra Club, and we're introduced to a character I really like that doesn't get a lot of focus, and that's Mogi, played by Dennis Christopher from Breaking Away. He's also Eddie Kaczmarek in It, the adult one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the rival runner in Chariots of Fire. And he's got like this... It was funny, he was doing an interview, and somebody asked him if he got to keep that really awesome period suit that he had.
Mm.
And he said he wasn't allowed to keep the suit, but he was wearing a white t-shirt during his death scene, and when the squib went off, he has this fake blood-drenched white shirt, and Tarantino signed that, and he got to keep that.
Oh, that's cool.
And then Mogi takes us upstairs, and we learn a lot. Before we even meet Calvin, we learn a lot about his character.
Yeah.
In what Mogi says. Because it's, well, Dennis Christopher's putting on this southern accent, but you'll notice his real voice comes out, because he's like, Calvin is a bit of a Francophile, and then Schultz starts to speak French, and he's like, he doesn't speak French, don't speak French to him, he gets embarrassed. Which shows you how much of a fake Candy is.
Of course.
It shows you that he's this... He's like... I don't like the show, but I'm going to say it anyway. He's a lot like Joffrey on Game of Thrones, really. He's basically this child in a man's body that has all this... Not in a man's body in Game of Thrones, but you get what I mean. And he has all this power, but he doesn't do anything. It's like when Tarantino actually specifically brought up the scene with Steven's intro. In Steven's intro, he is signing checks for Calvin Candy to show that he won't even do that. Calvin Candy literally does not do shit.
Pretty much.
He just goes around and does his Mandingo fighting. Which, by the way, is our very brutal introduction to him. Like, this thing got a lot of attention because it's the, like I was talking about, most of the violence is really over the top and spectacular and, you know, not in a disturbing way.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why it really hits you weirdly when you see this Mandingo fight. And just, like, the fact that Schultz has to pretend that he's really, really into this. And it's just this horrific thing. You hear, like, the bones crunching and the gouged out eyes and the hammer.
In essence, it's backyard wrestling.
To the death.
Yes.
They're covered in blood, each other's blood or their own blood. You can't really tell what's going on. But the interesting thing is we barely get too many cuts of it. We keep cutting back to the reaction shots. I love the shots when we you hear that brutal breaking sound, and instead of showing what happened, we cut to the jelly beans dropping on the floor.
That was awesome.
And then we get a hint of Candy's ruthlessness when he's screaming in pain because he's had his eyes gouged out, and he says finish. He says finish him and throws Big Fred the hammer.
Yep.
The hammer, by the way, that he threatens with twice and never uses. Another way to show that he's... To use Tarantino's own line, he can bark all day, but he can't necessarily bite.
That's when we get our Nero cameo, too, which is a really awesome little piece of business.
He has, Big Fred is the Mandingo owned by Candy, and the other Mandingo is...
Eskimo Joe?
No, he's
he's
Luigi.
Later on. Luigi, that's it, yeah.
Belongs to Franco Nero's character. And the interesting thing is the end of the original Django. He it's a very interesting scene. He they break his hands completely, so he has to like take off the thing around the trigger and basically press the trigger against something. He has to kill people this way. It's
oh wow!
But he still manages to do it.
Yeah.
So he has these bandages on his hands. And of course, when we see Franco Nero approach the bar in Django Unchained, he's wearing these white gloves that very much resemble bandages on his hands.
Nice.
And then he makes him spell Django, and then he says the D is silent, and Nero says, I know. By the way, people think that scene is totally pointless, but apparently it has a whole other meaning, apart from just as a point to have Nero say, I know.
Yeah.
To show that Django isn't necessarily, he's a force to be reckoned with, is the fact that slaves couldn't read.
Yeah.
So it kind of catches him off guard a bit that he can spell his own name, because that was unheard of.
True. Especially
if it had a silent letter in it. So then
so many times I heard Django said while the movie was out. And there's only one person allowed to say Django because he died for it.
Billy Crash.
Yes! We'll talk about him in a minute.
Billy Crash has a whole backstory too we'll get into.
Yes.
So anyway, we get this great scene with Candy where it's... What's really great was Jamie Foxx was always telling these stories about how when it came time to do the racial slurs, DiCaprio was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then he was like, it was great to hear Jamie Foxx do an impression of it. It was like, man, I don't know, man. But and then Samuel Jackson put him off to the side and said, man, hearing that word's just another Tuesday for us, so just do it. It's basically what happened.
Gotcha. So
DiCaprio was able to really get, he said the next day after that, DiCaprio couldn't even look at them because he was just going to embody himself in this hatred. And says it very... You can tell at some point DiCaprio was finally able to do it without flinching. So then there was, we go to the journey... This might have been the part that was cut. The journey to Candyland. It's this... Well, no. Well, I don't know. Because there's a couple of things in this scene that are really important that come back later. But it's mainly to show that how Django does posing as this, I forget exactly what they, I don't think I can say what they called him, but he's this, he's a black person that handles slaves. A black slaver, I think is what they said.
Yeah, the black slaver is actually the wording they use too. And
that's a really good way to get a slave on your bad side. That's when we see Rodney again. It's never brought up, but I can swear Rodney's at the beginning too, in the shackles.
He very well could be.
But he's the one that's looking up. He's the one that's eyeballing him.
Yeah.
It's like, get your goddamn eyeballs off me. And then that's the, he is a rambunctious soul, ain't he? Now, this is one scene I kind of have trouble with. I know it's important because they bring back the Smitty McCall scene when they're talking about, it was Schultz training Django, but then Schultz is starting to soften up, and then Django's the one that's hardened now.
True.
And Django brings back, you're the one that made me kill Smitty McCall in front of his child. Well, the thing that bothered me about that scene was, I know Calvin Candy's not the brightest of people, but nevertheless, Mogi was there too to kind of be the brains of the operation for him. So I find it a little odd that Schultz could actually say, you mind if we stop and I have a word with Django?
Yeah.
To discuss, business techniques.
In the middle of the...
Did neither Candy or Mogi think maybe, well, that's fishy.
But, it's kind of hot outside. We need to get back in this nice, back to the mansion.
Sun is hot, as Django says.
Exactly.
But then we have a big scene that comes back. You might think it's pointless at the time, but it's a huge scene later. It actually is the reason for a big scene.
Yeah.
The scene with D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan is this slave that tried to run away because he was a Mandingo fighter. But he got caught by Stone Cipher and his dogs, and the Trackers. The Trackers are a lot of people we know behind makeup and masks, like Zoe Bell and Savini and Michael Bowen and
Robert Carradine, of all people.
And Stone Cipher was originally going to be Sid Haig, but apparently there was a falling out because Sid Haig turned down the part of Marcellus Wallace, and I guess Tarantino used that against him.
He holds grudges.
Even though he cast him as the judge in Jackie Brown, but
yeah,
with Pam Grier being in that movie, he probably couldn't resist, like Schultz himself. But anyway, it's this brutal scene where, long story short, Candy makes Stone Cypher's dogs eat D'Artagnan alive.
Yep.
And Schultz is like, that's when Candy almost starts to have a hint when he says, your boy's looking a little green in the gills for a blood sport like Mandingo fighting.
Yeah,
I censored that line. And he says he just ain't used to seeing a guy ripped apart by dogs. And you can kind of sense that Candy might finally be getting a hint, but then not really.
Nope.
This is also the period of time we're introduced to Billy Crash, but I'll talk about him when this upcoming scene actually, when Billy Crash was to have a big scene when they got to Candyland and it was cut. You can see it in like the international trailers, but it was cut out of the full movie.
And the character, you should probably talk about the character that was completely cut out of Ace Woody.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. It's a whole thing.
Yep. Because Billy Crash shouldn't have been as big of a part if they would have went with the script.
Yeah.
As is.
So, there's this big scene where we get to Candyland, and it's this really thing. It's a very Sergio Leone thing, where you take the simplest of scenes and make them into this big, grand, long spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
The scenes in Sergio Leone movies are so long. Well, this goes into that as well. Yeah. It's kind of making me nervous. It's like, it looks a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
Your battery's going to make it, right?
It should be fine.
You see up here, is that normal?
Yeah.
This is going to be a weird part of the video, by the way.
Yeah, just a tad.
Okay, anyway.
I got a way to solve this. Give me a minute. Go ahead.
So they do this big triumphant scene where they make it to Candyland, and that's all they're doing, despite the fact of making this huge scene about it. And this is also where we're introduced to Steven, finally. The Samuel L. Jackson character who is a house slave, who hates Django at first sight because Django comes in on a horse. Django comes into Candyland on a horse, and Steven wants no part of this happening.
He just questions it immediately that he's on a horse.
We have that scene where at first it's a look of shock, and then it goes right into hatred, and it stays that way the whole time. There's another scene that was cut that I'll get into.
Due to the language of said scene, we're not going to go into that, but we know. Trust me, we know the word. We know the movie word for word.
If I could quote this movie, this video would have been like an hour longer already.
Yeah, no lie.
Because not that I like condone that kind of thing. It's just Tarantino's dialogue. It's just the way it flows. It's like music.
Agreed.
Like when Don Johnson first said the lines as Big Daddy, Tarantino approached him and said, "You sing in my key." So I'd say that's the way to talk about it.
That'll work.
Okay, so and then we have this great scene where Steven comes down, and they have this. Obviously, what it turns out to be a front, the way Steven is. Steven is like this. I don't know what the term would be. At least the appropriate term would be, but he really lays on the expectations of his position.
Yes, very much so. We'll go with that. That's a great way to put it, too.
Now, what was supposed to happen here was there was a character that was cut out of the movie that it was originally going to be Kevin Costner, but Kevin Costner had to drop out because of Man of Steel. Then Kurt Russell took it. Then Kurt Russell had to drop out because he didn't think that the movie was going in the right direction.
Correct.
For his likeness.
Yeah, of course.
This character was Ace Woody, and he was basically in charge of the Mandingos.
Yeah.
I actually kind of like this scene because it almost makes the scene in Greenville seem pointless. But it also showed a ruthlessness to this character that is now... Billy Crash was actually his own character, but he was on the side and had like 2 lines. So what happened was, I guess because Walton Goggins is such a great actor, Tarantino decided instead of recasting Ace Woody one more time, he's going to take Billy Crash and Ace Woody and morph them into the same character.
Exactly.
And he kept the name Billy Crash. Well, there's this scene where they have all the Mandingos that they've brought from Candyland, to Candyland from Greenville.
Yes.
Including Big Fred. Big Fred who won the fight that we saw. And Billy Crash is looking them over. And he finally realizes that Big Fred's not what he's looking for. And just right then and there, he just shoots Big Fred dead.
Yep.
And then he shoots more of them dead. And then just leaves it at that. Because he doesn't think any of them are good enough.
True.
Like I said, that may have been for time, and it may have also been because people might have complained that it was a whole lot for nothing. And then there's another, before we get to dinner at Candyland, there was another scene that was cut, and I'm very interested to see how this would have gone. I don't even know if this scene was filmed or not. I know some of those scenes were because they're in the international trailer. But there's a segment where Steven takes Django to his room, and just to put him in his place, Django smacks Steven across the face and just gets him on the ground and just smacks him around. And basically, you know, tells him what his place is. Which further explains the Steven-Django rivalry.
Yeah.
So we go into probably my favorite scene of the movie, which is like 25 minutes to a half hour long. The dinner scene itself.
Yes.
The whole thing.
So awesome.
Starting from the song that was written for the movie to the dinner, as the table's being set. And Schultz is the first time Schultz sees Brumilda. It's like this big mythical character to him this whole time. And then he sees Brumilda for the first time. It's like meeting like your favorite fictional character for the first time. It's really strong. And then, of course, you know, we continue Schultz's theatrics where he has Django on the other side of the door and builds it up. And, you know, we have a mutual friend. And what's interesting about that scene is Brumhilda's nervous because she thinks she's going to Schultz's bedroom to basically...
Have some fun.
Yeah.
We'll go with that.
But to make her comfortable and realize that's not what's going on, you'll notice that the bed is kind of turned over and Schultz is like just in his vest and shirt.
Yep.
So what happens when she gets in the room is, instead of the reverse, which is what she was expecting, Schultz puts on more clothes and makes the bed before introducing Django to her. And then the line everybody loves, the "you silver-tongued devil." That might have helped his Oscar a little bit.
Just a tad.
So then finally we have the big dinner scene where Calvin Candy is totally oblivious to everything. He's just happy to be doing business and making money and eating food and telling slaves what to do.
In essence, he's Steven's Dupont, not the other way around.
But the thing is as the scene progresses, Steven, who's obviously the brains of the operation, starts to figure things out. Like, he's spotting these little things. So finally he manages to come to the conclusion that not only does Brumilda have a thing for Django, they probably know each other, and fuck, they're probably married. And he just happens to be right.
Wow.
So he says, he's doing his thing where he, like, interrupts Schultz and he says, "I need to have a word with you in private." And he's like, "You mean get up out of my chair?" And then he just kind of says, "Well, you know what," and then he whispers, "Meet me in the library."
Yeah.
And we know that's like their code for real shit's going down.
Yep.
So Candy gets up and goes to the library. And we see, this is when we get the real Steven, finally. We kind of got glimpses of him. But this was the big reveal. The first of two big reveals. For starters, there's actually a big reveal at the end when he throws his cane away and walks. But the thing about that is, the fact that he can walk is already revealed because Candy walks in, and you can tell it's going to be a big deal, this shot, because we do that big traumatic spin around to Steven sitting in the chair. And he goes from the, "I misses you like I misses a rock in my shoe," to, "them motherfuckers ain't human by no man thing." He turns into Samuel L. Jackson.
He really does.
And we know he's not crippled because he's sitting with his legs crossed. So, there's that. And then he basically lays everything out to Calvin, like a father explaining something simple to his child.
Yeah.
And I love the delivery of, "This is I and goddamn time Sons of bitches. And then the loud sons of bitches. And that he actually ranted on farther, but the scene cuts in the actual movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he brings up a tar and feathering and everything.
Good God.
And that's when Ben is not in the script. This skull, and he goes into the whole phrenology, I think it's called. The thing that's... This kind of... yeah. That's... Apparently this is like a really old theory that was like put to rest hundreds of years ago. But obviously being Calvin, he believes it. About the whole dimples in the skull thing. And then he manages to use this as a threat while doing it. And you can see, when you watch Schultz through the whole scene, you can see him starting to figure out what's going on. And realizing that they're in danger now. So, then finally Candy just flips out, and DiCaprio gets to scream. A lot of people like to make fun of when we hear his voice crack. Which I think actually helps, because it may have been a DiCaprio thing, but it also shows Candy's childlike quality.
Yeah. Like,
people tend to say DiCaprio, like, you know, it's like a kid that plays dress up in his dad's clothes and tries to pretend to be him, like when he does big movies like J. Edgar or The Aviator.
Yeah.
But that's perfect for this part, because that's exactly what Calvin Candy is. So, then they managed to do once again, I can't say it, but my favorite delivery of the movie is what Candy says after he's got his money, right before he throws the hammer down. And we think the movie's basically going to end here.
Yep.
And then, in the script, it was rhubarb pie. In the movie, he says, "I'd like to invite you to some white cake." What I was thinking was, with the thing about getting blood on white things, like the cotton and then the horse.
Yeah.
My first thought was, well, this white cake is going to get blood on it. They actually didn't... metaphorically, you can say that, sure.
Yes.
So then you completely throw the audience off once again. You've already killed the Brittle Brothers in less than an hour into the movie. Now you're going to kill Calvin Candy with about 35 minutes left.
Yep.
But here's the thing. Not only are you killing Calvin Candy, you're killing Schultz directly after him. This is when I came to the realization of... I knew everything up to this point. Okay, what happens after Calvin Candy dies? Immediately, Schultz goes out in this dramatic fashion. In this very over-the-top way. And that's when you kind of... I kind of had... I wasn't sure how to take that scene when I first saw it. Because they build up how monstrous these characters are.
Yeah.
Calvin and Steven.
Of course.
But then you get this scene, it's... You don't know who to feel sorry for, where your emotions are going. But Schultz, this character we've grown to love and has been our hero throughout the movie, is literally blown to pieces across the room.
Yeah.
But in the same shot, we have Steven holding Calvin and crying, because this has basically been his son. Because he's basically raised him when Calvin, you know, didn't have his dad, basically.
Exactly.
I've always wondered if we're supposed to feel sympathetic or not. Because this movie is very heavy on the... Everyone absolutely must get what they deserve.
Yeah.
In the most brutal of ways. And you'll notice all the villains of the movie explode in blood, but Candy doesn't. I mean, I know he can't really because the gun is so small, but I mean, Candy does not go out in a dramatic fashion.
No.
Which is interesting. Somebody had a theory once that Candy thinks the world revolves around him, basically. And it's a metaphor when he backs up and then his hand slips off the globe and he dies and the globe spins. It's basically telling Calvin the world is still spinning without you.
That's awesome.
I don't know if Tarantino meant that or not, but I heard
and if
somebody
not,
say
he
that.
may say he has, just because it sounds good.
And speaking of that, here's another thing about that scene. People tend to question... This is where I'm just going to say, everybody who has a problem with the movie, this is why you shouldn't.
Okay.
From here on. The next complaint is, when Schultz killed Candy, why didn't Butch turn around immediately and kill Schultz?
Yeah.
The reason, apparently, Tarantino's never confirmed this, but somebody said it, and it makes perfect sense. Somehow, within this handshake, Candy was going to kill Schultz.
Mm-hmm.
You could just tell by the sinister eyes. Yes. They say it's very, I will say, by the way, apparently this was on purpose. When we first see him in Greenville, with the red suit, and the way his hair is kind of back, and the way his facial hair is kind of pointed, Calvin Candy's supposed to look like the devil.
I was thinking that's what you were going with.
So they say it's like a Faust thing when he offers the handshake.
And Schultz is the angel. And
like a deal with the devil thing.
Okay.
I say we're supposed to assume that Candy was going to kill Schultz in some way, because the reason Butch doesn't turn around is because we hear a gunshot and a body fall. It's Schultz killing Candy. But Butch isn't looking, and Butch must have been expecting to hear a shot and a body fall, which is why he didn't react. But then, when Steven screams Calvin is when Butch turns around.
It's like there's a spot I did as a manager, and a lot of wrestling promotions have done this over the years. Like, you turn your back and you taunt the crowd, and the guy gets whipped in, and he reverses it, and you trip the guy, but you trip your guy. But you don't realize that until you turn around and you see your guy laying on the ground. And that's exactly what Tarantino did with that.
And, of course, the ultimate irony. James Remar has two parts in this movie.
Yes.
He is A-Spec and he is Butch Pooch.
Mm-hmm.
You remember the very first scene of the movie, Christoph Waltz kills James Remar's character.
Yes.
And now, talking about people getting revenge...
Yep.
James Remar gets to kill him back.
Yeah, very true.
And then the bloodiest fucking shootout probably in a very long time ensues.
Oh my God,
it's like,
insane.
This thing, and people complain about the modern music, the Tupac mixed with James Brown, no less.
Yeah.
There's also the great scenes with I Got a Name and 100 Black Coffins earlier.
Yeah.
And there's this this is when people start to piss me off. A lot of people give Django a hard time because of its third act. Well, here's the problem is, people tend to not realize what they're going into. This is why I like to see movies more than once. If I like a movie but I think it's too long, I like to see it again, because if you don't know what direction a movie is going, then yeah, you're more than likely going to say, this feels a little long.
Yeah.
But if you know where the movie is headed and you know where it's going and why it has to get there and what it has to do to get there, then it won't feel long. And it'll feel necessary.
The numerous times we watched this movie, it seems like every time it would get shorter and shorter.
The reason is...
It would feel shorter, at least.
This is probably a bad example, but I'll use it anyway.
Okay.
It's like getting mad. It'd be like saying Psycho was too long because the movie continued after Jane Lee died.
No.
People see Candy as the main antagonist, so when Candy dies, people expect the movie to end. But not even close, really. What happens is you shift your antagonist. If you've been really, really, into it, you'll realize Candy's not really a main antagonist, it's Steven.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as Steven is alive, this movie's not going to end.
That's right.
And if you enjoy the movie enough, like if you say, I like the movie, but it should have ended here, or it should have ended here, I think that's kind of bullshit, because if you really like the movie, you want to watch it until Steven is dead.
Yes. Very true.
There are so many people that I've heard, I think they're just complaining that it felt like an ending, but I guarantee they would have been pissed off. I've heard people say two things that say it's too long. They say it should have ended when Django surrenders to Steven. What the fuck for? Why would we go through all of this just for Django to surrender to Steven?
And then the credits roll, and then...
Then secondly, people say, well, why didn't they just end it when he blew up the LaQuint Dickey guys and he rode off to save Broomhilda? They said, we could have just, known what he was going to do, and it would have been left to our interpretation how he did it.
No.
If the movie ended either one of those ways, nobody would have liked it.
No.
They're just saying that because they think it's too long.
Yeah.
So, here's the thing. Okay, so the people that say this are telling me they came all this way into this movie, but they don't want to see Steven die and they don't want to see Broomhilda get saved.
What have you been investing your time into this last 2.5 hours?
And another point is to show that, like I said, the main antagonist is not Candy. The main antagonist is Steven. And Steven establishes his antagonistic qualities by showing just how vicious he is because he himself is a slave.
Mm-hmm.
Steven is the biggest hypocrite of all time.
Yes, very much so.
But he hates Django so much, and he's, I guess, been in the house for so long, I guess, is what it is. The movie becomes slave versus slave.
Yep.
And he's willing to... Well, the funny thing was, Laura Lee actually takes over after Calvin. And they're saying, what do we do with Django? Let's cut his balls off. Let's kill him. Let's do this. And Steven's over... The way he described it, Steven's over here going, why don't we just sell him to the Liquid people? And they're just going, And then finally, Steven's like, the Liquid people? And they're just like, what should we do with it? And then finally Laura Lee says, I got it. Let's send it to the Liquid people.
Good God.
That's basically the story Steven tells in the bar.
Yeah.
So then, people complain that the LaQuint-Dickey scene is too long. Well, here's another thing. The whole point of the movie is Django and Schultz were kind of shifting.
Mm-hmm.
Schultz is the fast talker and the guy that gets out of sticky situations, and Django is the spectator.
Yep.
Then slowly it starts to turn around because Schultz starts to soften up. Just like softening up to D'Artagnan got him killed.
Exactly.
So Django has basically become Schultz, more or less. All the way down to teaching his horse a trick. Like, people say, why was the horse dancing? It's to go with the way Schultz taught Fritz to bow, is what it is. And the reason for the LaQuint-Dickey scene is to show that Django can talk himself out of a sticky situation exactly the same way that Schultz could now.
Correct.
Because he has come full circle. Just like the ending scene when, after the mansion is blown up, we get that last shot of Schultz saying, you know what, you're going to be the fastest gun in the South. That's the movie telling us that Schultz always knew the greatness that Django was destined for, and he never doubted it.
Exactly.
And so the ending of the movie has to happen so we can see Django come to what Schultz always knew he would be.
Exactly.
So, yeah. A lot of people hate the scene where Laura Lee gets blown out of the room, but...
Bye, Miss Laura. Bang!
It's a Tarantino movie, come on.
Yeah.
That shit's gonna be in there.
Yeah, of course it is.
And, that's... It's just, that's what was great was, when you go to a Tarantino movie, you want to go to a Tarantino movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you can usually tell his movies by the violence and the dialogue.
Correct.
But when you see things like that shootout, or when you see Laura completely illogically fly out of the room, that is classic Tarantino. Yeah. That is the stuff you go to Tarantino movies for.
Exactly.
Besides, the great dialogue and the fact that it's probably going to be a masterpiece if it has his name on it.
Of course.
So, and yeah, he won the screenplay Oscar, even with his third act. And everybody says the same thing. They say, I love Django until the third act, and then it just shit itself. And they said the writing went to total crap in the third act. I don't know why he won the Oscar for it. I don't see any difference whatsoever in the writing in the third act and the first two.
No,
nothing at all. It all has this. It's all in the same story.
Yeah. It
just happens to be an epic story. I'm sure when you went into the movie, you saw 165 minutes next to it. So, if you think it has too many endings and you don't like how long it goes, you're clearly not totally invested.
No.
And if you... I can understand there are people that may like the movie that think it's too long, but it's not what they think it is. It's not the LaQuint-Dickey stuff, and it's not having to kill the trackers. It's not having to save Broomhilda. It's not blowing up the mansion. Maybe the trip to Candyland, maybe that made it feel long, but it's not the ending.
Mm-mm.
So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, the acting in this movie is superb. I mean, Christoph Waltz and Quentin Tarantino together are a match made in heaven, literally.
They're 2 for 2 at Oscars.
They are, and I'm pretty sure they'll be 3 for 3 if there's
Like
another one comes up.
Somebody said the whole season they were saying, but what if Waltz gets in instead of DiCaprio? And it's like, well, even if that happens, it's not like he's going to win, because he's not going to win for 2 Tarantino movies in a row.
I was the one that said that Waltz was going to get in, and then you were like, I don't know.
Him winning started with the Globes.
Yep.
That came out of nowhere.
And then it just continued.
I could have sworn it was Jones's for Lincoln.
Yeah. And like Tarantino winning screenplay, I was like, it's going to happen, trust me.
I thought Haneke had it.
And Haneke was going to look like he was going to take it. Nope.
I say this as many times as possible. I fucking hate Haneke.
Yes.
And seeing him not only get beat by Tarantino, but get beat by Tarantino for this movie was just a fantastic moment.
And I like Tarantino beating Mark Bowl, too. That was a nice little payback for the Hurt Locker and Bastards.
But as he showed at the Globes, there's clearly no hard feelings.
No, not at all.
So,
we got one more video of the Summer of Tarantino, and then you can finally rest on a Saturday, sir.
It probably won't. I've already gone through all of them, so it'll probably only be like 10 minutes long.
Next week will be the finish, the final video. We will determine what AJ's favorite Quentin Tarantino film is of all time, and some other things as well. So we'll check on that, and that's going to be the end for today.